the most astonishing sensation.
Tonight at 10:30 on Anglia, Juggernaut Jamboree. Paul Barnes takes a behind-the-scenes look at the British Truck Grand Prix at Silverstone as the much-maligned monsters of the motorway become racetrack stars.
You can get into all kinds of trouble, because I've been in all kinds of trouble, completely sideways and still get away with it.
Juggernaut Jamboree, tonight at 10:30 on Anglia.
Don't take chances, take TV Times. This week we set the scene for ITV's £2.5 million star-studded film Scoop, Evelyn Waugh's classic send-up of Fleet Street. Cat's Eyes returns. We meet one of the kittens in Amsterdam. And don't take a chance on missing any of the great entertainment on ITV and Channel 4. Take TV Times.
The thing about Angel Delight is that it tastes deliciously creamy. It's also very, very light. Bird's Angel Delight. Don't let go of your glass.
The new Electrolux has a little white button. Just press it, and it becomes the most powerful vacuum cleaner you can buy. The new 2000 series from Electrolux. Nothing sucks like an Electrolux.
In your home, there could be a deadly killer. You won't hear it. You won't smell it. It won't wake you up, which is why you should have your home watched. Upstairs and down, a Home Watch smoke alert system is always on guard. Because you can't be. The Home Watch smoke alert system, day and night, it watches your home.
Don't make that DIY choice until you've heard the voice. Hey, let's go DIY. The more you look around, the bigger it will sound. Hey, let's go DIY. It's sounding loud and clear. Now everyone can hear. Hey, let's go DIY. So every time you call, the sign will say, oh, hey, let's go DIY.
Drop into programmes for Friday night here on Anglia. At 7, take a peek through the keyhole at the homes of the rich and famous.
What upset me more than anything was so much hairspray. I need so little.
At 7:30, meet Matlock.
Harvey, I'm in deep trouble. He's handled murder trials all over the country.
A case of murder and a trial that threatens to escalate into a major national scandal.
Now, I've heard about you, Matlock, and if you're suppressing evidence, I will nail you.
At 9, a new term begins at Drummond School, the first term for the headmaster's wife.
I barged into your home, turned the place upside down.
Just what it needed. It's been the right way out for too long.
With Cross Question and the late film The Light at the Edge of the World, these are programmes for Friday night here on Anglia.
This is Anglia Television. Now from ITN, the news at 10 o'clock.
The nurses' pay goes up at twice the rate of inflation. Mrs. Thatcher says the electorate will be deciding very soon. The former head of MI6 admitted he was a homosexual. The ferry chairman says the capsizing was a human error. And the twins with birthdays 18 months apart. Good evening. The nurses are getting a pay rise of 9.5% on average. That's twice the rate of inflation. It's the full amount recommended by the pay review body, and they'll get it backdated to the 1st of this month. Doctors, army officers and judges are all getting smaller increases. The government says that's because the public recognise nurses as a special case. The opposition says it's because this is an election year. The health unions call it an election sweetener. The Royal College of Nursing says it's satisfied with the rise, though nurses wanted between 17 and 20%.
It's some time since the government accepted without any ifs or buts a review board's recommendation on nurses' pay, and Labour think they know the reason why.
Well, it's a pity we don't have an election every year. It is the first time the government have honoured the Nurses' Pay Award. Last year, if they're paying 9% this year, why didn't they pay 9% last year? In fact, they paid 3% less, the same the year before. It's all to do with elections.
The Alliance also welcomed the pay award.
So it's good news, but perhaps the lesson is the government only look after the health service when there's an election coming. Perhaps we ought to have a government which looks after the health service whether there's an election or not.
The government tries to ignore talk like that, but it can't ignore the fact that many voters still think about health service cuts rather more than health service improvements. The minister responsible, though, insisted today it's no election bribe.
I think it is recognised by the public that the nurses do have special claims because of the responsibilities that they have and because of the tremendous responsibility they have in the wards and inside in terms of the health service.
In fact, the nurses, with an average rise of 9.5%, are top of quite an extensive list of other rises. Other medical workers, like midwives and health visitors, are getting just over 9%. The health authorities, incidentally, are getting an extra £328 million to pay for the rises which affect them. The money's not coming from cuts elsewhere in the NHS. Some individual examples: a staff nurse will now get a basic £7,090 a year instead of £6,475, and a nursing sister £8,836 instead of £8,070. But all of this left some of the nurses tonight very severely disappointed.
I feel that nurses are not being recognised for their professional standing in society.
It makes you seriously consider other jobs and professions which perhaps will only require a shorter amount of training.
It's going to make a difference of about £7 a week to me, maybe just over £7 a week. It's not a great deal more. It's certainly not what we were hoping for.
The questions really are whether or not this will actually stop the massive flood away from the nursing profession. And I think that will remain to be seen. I mean, many nurses, I think, were hoping for even higher awards than this, and it's understandable that they should be. Their salaries are very low indeed.
Other pay rises were announced today. Doctors and dentists are getting nearly 8% more, the armed forces just under 6%, and top people like judges and senior civil servants 4.8%. All of them well above the inflation rate. And all of that helped to raise still more Westminster talk about a June election. The Prime Minister, either by design or accident, did her bit in that direction, answering Mr. Kinnock on benefit for the young unemployed.
I think we shall very soon be putting to the electorate whether young people who neither stay on at school, nor stay on in education, nor take training, nor take a job, are entitled to receive supplementary benefits from others. Many of us think that they are not entitled to call upon their neighbours to keep them under those circumstances.
And tonight, those two words, very soon, suggest to many MPs that Mrs. Thatcher is now only considering why she shouldn't go to the country in June. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Westminster.
The Prime Minister told the Commons today that she wanted what she called a new negotiating position with the teachers in the coming years. She said the teachers taking industrial action had lowered the image of the profession. The second biggest teaching union, the Schoolmasters and Women Teachers, did not instruct its members to refuse to cover for absent colleagues today, but it did vote that no teacher should be required to provide cover. British Rail said it would put a pay rise of 4.5% into the wage packets of its 138,000 staff. The union's claim for 14% is going to arbitration. Senior civil servants are to get a pay raise of 4.8%. Their officials said they were disappointed, and 80,000 middle-ranking civil servants were told their pay will be linked to their job performance by next April.
The Prime Minister has confirmed that the former head of MI6, Sir Maurice Oldfield, was a homosexual. Mrs. Thatcher said in a written Commons reply that he was a security risk, but there was no evidence that security had been compromised. Opposition MPs are demanding more parliamentary control over the security services. Sir Maurice joined the intelligence corps during the war. He rose through the ranks of MI6. In the 1960s, he was the liaison officer with the CIA. He became the head of MI6 in 1973 and retired 5 years later. In 1979, Mrs. Thatcher brought him out of retirement to coordinate security in Northern Ireland.
Today's disclosure is another major embarrassment to the intelligence services. Sir Maurice Oldfield, for 5 years head of MI6, and Mrs. Thatcher's personal choice to head security in Ulster, was a confessed homosexual who had to be stripped of his security clearance. It was in response to allegations in last week's Mail on Sunday that the Prime Minister made her written statement, confirming that Sir Maurice, when confronted by police evidence in 1980, had admitted from time to time engaging in homosexual activities. This made him a potential security risk, though the Prime Minister says no damage was done. Nevertheless, government sources acknowledge that if Sir Maurice had admitted his homosexuality, he wouldn't even have got a job with MI6, never mind headed it. So he must have lied repeatedly. The disclosures shocked those ministers who knew him.
This is a devastating blow, there's no doubt about that, because he would never have tolerated in any senior security post anybody being a practicing homosexual, because he would have known how vulnerable they were to blackmail.
Spy author Chapman Pincher, who originally broke the story, says the affair has exposed the Secret Service's incompetence.
Well, I think what the revelations show is that the security services and the Secret Services generally are not very competent at discovering their own problems. If they do, they would always rather tend to hide them than have a scandal. I think that if this thing had come to light while Sir Maurice was the head, he would have had to resign.
The positive vetting procedure is very flawed and always has been. It's designed to identify the character defects that might make somebody vulnerable to blackmail. Unfortunately, most of the major spies that have been identified in this country since 1951 have all undergone the positive vetting procedure and been cleared for access to secrets.
But Anthony Cavendish, a lifelong friend, tonight defended Sir Maurice.
I'm shattered that Mrs. Thatcher didn't make a more positive statement about him today. I mean, she felt it worthwhile to visit him on his deathbed, and I think he was an extremely loyal public servant. I think he did a great deal of work for this country, and I feel he's yet one more intelligence officer that's going to be allowed to be smeared.
Sir Maurice died in 1981, but while his loyalty remains unquestioned, his memory and the reputation of the Secret Service he led may have been irretrievably tarnished.
An all-party committee of MPs condemned British prisons today as critically overcrowded and dependent on unsuitable and insanitary buildings. The Home Affairs Committee report recommends new high-rise jails and a form of house arrest for non-violent offenders using electronic bracelets.
There are some 50,000 prisoners in England and Wales, and jails are bursting at the seams. Cells designed for one are often shared by three, and the MPs say there's monstrous overcrowding. They want to reduce the number of inmates by sending down only serious offenders. Ex-prisoners say the overcrowding is bad enough, but the Victorian conditions make it worse.
To expect a guy to live in those sort of conditions, it is degrading, and you just can never get used to it. It's really depressing, it really does get you down.
The committee says conditions could be improved by building more prisons to end overcrowding, modernising old ones, and there should be a code of minimum standards to force the pace of change.
Unless these two aims, which I say are the foundation of our report, of reducing the number of prisoners and improving the conditions in which they live, then you could have a prison crisis of unparalleled proportions on our hands.
The program of building 20 new prisons and refurbishing 100 old prisons is a very major effort and an extremely expensive one. And I'm very glad that my colleagues in the government have allowed me to continue it and step it up.
The crisis of prison numbers is even worse in the United States, and the MPs think the government should study the American ideas of high-rise jails and electronic tagging of offenders. It's a high-tech ball and chain that, through a radio signal to a computer, enables police to keep tabs on an offender. There have already been disturbances in British prisons, and the committee fears that riots could follow unless the pressure of overcrowding is eased.
President Reagan says there won't be more progress at the Geneva arms talks unless the Soviet Union replies to America's proposals on policing the agreements. But he also said the prospects for an agreement on medium-range nuclear forces had moved forward. He was speaking as the talks on medium-range missiles were resumed.
At the reopening of the Geneva talks today, the Soviets did not put in writing the offer made by Mr. Gorbachev last week, but say they will soon. The offer was to axe shorter-range missiles in Europe, as well as the medium-range ones which have been on the table for years. Officials from NATO countries are still trying to form a joint view about the Soviet offer, which held out the long-term hope of removing all nuclear weapons from Europe. Scrapping them has considerable appeal for European public opinion, but less for the politicians and the military. They are concerned that a nuclear-free Western Europe would make the threat from Soviet conventional forces look more dangerous. NATO policy relies on the use of nuclear weapons to stop an attack if necessary. The NATO policy of flexible response means battlefield nuclear weapons would be used first. Next would come short-range missiles and aircraft, then medium-range missiles and planes based in countries like Britain. The final step would be to use American strategic nuclear weapons. The Soviet proposal to remove much of the middle two layers of escalation means American strategic missiles would be called on earlier, and the European fear is the Americans might hold them back for fear of risking their own cities. The West Germans are particularly concerned. If NATO's European nuclear weaponry becomes just short range, like artillery, it's on West German territory that most of those nuclear shells would explode. But today, US Secretary of State Schultz told Europe by satellite there was no need for concern.
There are many nuclear weapons left in Europe, not considering the ones under discussion. And those nuclear weapons constitute the basis, along with those in the United States, for the implementation of a flexible response policy. And we have every intention of keeping that nuclear deterrence in place.
Whatever's agreed in Geneva, over 4,000 nuclear weapons of one sort or another will probably remain based on European soil.
The test tube baby with a twin sister who's 18 months older went home from hospital with her parents tonight. They say they still can't quite believe they have a second daughter. The twins are the first babies in the world to be conceived at exactly the same moment, but born at different times, thanks to advanced techniques for freezing embryos.
24 hours after arrival in this world, they're calling Elizabeth Mary Wright a miracle baby. 18 months ago, her twin sister Amy was born after a test tube pregnancy. At the same time as Amy was conceived, 6 other fertilized eggs were stored in deep freeze. 9 months ago, Mrs. Wright, who was sterilized after giving birth to 2 children from a previous marriage, decided to try and present her new husband Philip with his second child, hence Amy's deep-frozen twin sister.
Amy came out of the first 2 frozen eggs that were replaced. Then 18 months later, from that same batch of eggs, we've had Elizabeth, so they are effectively, they're twins.
Did you ever expect to have a second one?
No. We had Amy, and that was more than a miracle for us. We just couldn't believe that would be possible. But to think that now we have Elizabeth too, it's just too big for words, really. We're just so happy.
So when people describe Elizabeth as a minor miracle, I mean, that's an understatement.
Oh, it's a gross understatement, yes, because it's a total major miracle for us.
Very difficult to put into words how I feel. It's so incredible.
Did you ever think that after Amy that another one would arrive?
I didn't think at times that we would be that lucky, and yet I didn't give up hope because she's here.
So when they say a miracle, you really believe it?
Yes, I do, yes.
In fact, it's a double celebration today. It's also Dad's 36th birthday. To mark the occasion, Mother and baby Elizabeth were given Rolls-Royce treatment to return home this afternoon. Terry Lloyd, News at 10, Stoke-on-Trent.
The wreckage below decks in the Zeebrugge ferry tells the story of the disaster. The company's chairman puts it down to human error. A report next. Plus the day South Africa's blacks didn't go to work. And the princess in the steps of the Iron Duke. That's in a couple of minutes.
Telepathy, dreams of the future, time travel. Unexplained. Standing stones, ley lines, the pyramids, unexplained. Vanishing ships, black holes, UFOs, unexplained. Now, this publication throws new light on all the most intriguing mysteries in the universe. The unexplained. Back at newsagents, now.
Reclaimed building materials from Solo Park. Select the very best of Old England's original materials. Solo Park, near Pampisford, Cambridge.
Here, looking for a new technological washing machine? It's logical and easy to use. The Logic 1200 from Hoover. A lot of techno, with a bit of logic.
Collect just 600 grams worth of these special Maxwell House labels and we'll send you this coffee mug absolutely free. While stocks last.
The new Quattro drills from Black & Decker with hammer action. Tough enough to drive a Quattro into any surface. Almost as if it isn't there at all. With variable speed and slow start for pinpoint accuracy. Adjustable torque for power you control. Automatic shutoff and reversible action. Quattro drills from Black & Decker. Tough tools for tough jobs.
What's this? Kellogg's Nutri-Grain whole grain flakes. Is that it?
Uh-huh.
No sugar added. Well, good luck.
Kellogg's Nutri-Grain. The whole grain, the whole goodness, the whole taste.
You've eaten the whole lot.
So I have.
Kellogg's Nutri-Grain. Whole grain flakes. You'll eat the whole lot.
There's something new in the air. A new airline that can fly you to New York or Toronto from Stansted. Without asking you to book weeks in advance or placing conditions on the length of your stay. Yet at a special price no other scheduled airline can match from anywhere in the UK. Highland Express. Local and less. And he scored again with that just-cooked taste.
Don't you insist on Walker's crisps?
The chairman of the company which owns the Herald of Free Enterprise has blamed avoidable human error for the Zeebrugge accident. Sir Geoffrey Sterling said if the ferry hadn't gone to sea with its bow doors open, it wouldn't have sunk. At least 176 people lost their lives. The formal inquiry is due to begin on Monday. Today, the government more than doubled the limit for compensation to victims of sea accidents to £80,000. In Belgium, the salvage team plan to tow the ferry back to port tomorrow. The latest pictures show the damage in the passenger areas. In one corner, a heap of unused life jackets. With no time to rescue the handicapped, a wheelchair lies abandoned, and on the vehicle decks, cars and lorries are tangled together. Naval experts have been questioning the safety of roll-on, roll-off ferries for years, as Lawrence McGuinty of ITN's Channel 4 News reports.
Bow doors gaping open, this model of the Herald will soon be used in tests to find out how water got into the ship. Ship designers have been worried about the safety of ferries since the European Gateway accident 3 years ago.
We've been concerned for a long time about safety of ro-ro ships, as most other naval architects, I think. And BMT as a company did a lot of work on the European Gateway. And in fact, we did forecast that other incidents would occur from that study.
What worries the designers is that ships with a high centre of gravity and wide decks, like car decks, can capsize quickly. In slow motion, the reason why is clear. Water getting onto the open deck flows to the side of the ship that's already listing over, and the weight of that water accelerates the capsize. Yet new ferries under construction, this one at Bremerhaven, are bigger and higher than even the Herald was. But P&O, who took over Townsend only 5 days before the disaster, say it's clear the ship wouldn't have sunk if its bow doors had not been open.
We're dealing with the strong possibility that a ship went out to sea with its bow doors wide open. And the point that the public must be interested in, and what it's all about, is if it hadn't gone out to sea with its bow doors open, would it have sunk? And the answer is no. But I will be very surprised if it will prove to be other than avoidable human error.
P&O say they have now installed on the bridges of all their ferries warning lights to show when the doors are open, and will do more if necessary.
If during an inquiry with measured debate and proven need,
It goes without saying that this company would incorporate any recommendation which made sense.
The still stricken Herald will be towed to port tomorrow. When its submerged lower decks are pumped out, new clues could be uncovered.
The United States has called on the South African government to set up an independent inquiry into the shooting of 7 black strikers by police yesterday. For the second day running, tens of thousands of blacks stayed away from work in Johannesburg. Peter Sharp's report has been compiled under the emergency restrictions.
At sunrise this morning, groups of young radicals, the so-called comrades, had gathered on the streets of Soweto enforcing the stay away. Bus services had been suspended and taxis were stopped from taking workers into Johannesburg as the comrades, some armed with rocks and bricks, set up their own unofficial roadblocks. In the city centre 12 miles away, the effects were obvious. On the wall of the Union headquarters, a chilling reminder of yesterday's security force raid on the Federation offices. Officials arriving at work this morning found the building exactly as the riot police had left it. Doors had been smashed in as the police interrogation teams swept through the building. Documents were confiscated and union members detained. State-run television, never one to question the press restrictions, excelled itself last night. Its coverage of the worst violence since the state of emergency was introduced consisted of a slideshow. And viewers will have been much comforted by SABC's second story, reporting a drop in violence in the country.
Decline in deaths and unrest incidents represent a positive tendency, evident since the last quarter of 1986.
The white election is less than 2 weeks away, and it's coming at a time when the white electorate has never been more ill-informed. The state of emergency restrictions have ensured that on a day-by-day basis, most of the population is simply unaware of what's happening in its own country. Peter Sharp, News at 10 in Johannesburg.
Here, the Foreign Office has said that Mr. Robert Maxwell, the Scottish engineer who's been released from jail in Libya, should be home at the weekend. He's now been moved to the centre of Tripoli and he'll be given his travel documents tomorrow. Miss Rachel Macmillan, the granddaughter of the late Lord Stockton, has died in mysterious circumstances. Miss Macmillan, the manager of a rock band, was found dying in her London home yesterday, only hours after she'd been robbed at knife point.
Unions and management at the Caterpillar tractor factory near Glasgow have agreed to a new formula to end the sit-in over job losses. It'll be put to the workforce on Monday. The Guinness Company set aside £125 million today as the cost of the takeover of distillers and its consequences. That doesn't include any future legal costs. But pre-tax profits were £355 million in the past 15 months, and Guinness shares rose 10 pence in the market.
The Alliance parties see the local elections on May the 7th as their big test to justify their ambitions in the general election. That's especially true in Liverpool, where they control the city after the disqualification of Labour councillors.
Liverpool's civic coach, dust sheets removed and newly polished, came to the town hall to pick up the Lord Mayor, Lady Doreen Jones, who's wife of the Liberal leader, Sir Trevor. It was a gesture designed both to celebrate St George's Day and to show that the Liberals were back in power in place of Labour, which abolished the post of Lord Mayor.
The mood of the people in Liverpool at the moment is that they've had enough of the sort of antics that they've had to put up with over the last 4 years, and they want a change.
To win control of the town hall, the Alliance needs to win 12 seats, mostly from Labour. Peter Kilfoyle, Labour's agent, says they won't do it. He's had to organise a new and hopefully militant Free Party and says militant is no longer an issue.
Well, the party's in good shape. I think it's in very good shape to fight these elections. Militants just isn't an issue in this local government election.
But Derek Hatton is still active and still blaming Labour leaders for the city's problems.
I think that one of the major problems the Labour Party's got in the city, of course, is that the influence of the National Labour Party leadership, who in many ways were responsible for much of what has happened over the last year or so.
The Conservatives are officially optimistic about the elections, but agent Hugo Musson can realistically only hope the party holds the balance of power after May the 7th. Liverpool is, of course, a law unto itself, and the result here won't greatly affect Mrs Thatcher's calculations about the date of the next election. But victory is vital for the Alliance, who want to keep their bandwagon rolling, and for Labour, which wants to restore its image in the city. It's important, too, for Liverpool, for when the horses are gone and the election is over, someone has got to clean up the many remaining problems. Peter Allen, News at 10, Liverpool.
The Director of Public Prosecutions is seeking leave to appeal to the House of Lords over the 26 Liverpool supporters wanted in Belgium. The DPP will contest a High Court ruling that the 26 could not be extradited to face charges arising out of the Heysel Stadium riot. Manchester United's goalkeeper Gary Bailey has retired at 28. He's been forced out by a knee injury aggravated while training with England in Mexico, for which United want £500,000 compensation. Snooker Neil Foles has admitted he's taking one of the beta blocker drugs. He found out last week he's suffering from a rapid heartbeat. He's still planning to meet Dennis Taylor in the quarter-finals of the World Championship in Sheffield. Cricket, Essex fell behind in their match against MCC. Brian Hardy, with 79, was the only batsman to do anything much. For MCC, Philip de Freitas took 5 for 62, and young Paul Jarvis 3 for 43.
And the main news again, the nurses are getting a 9.5% pay rise, the full amount recommended by the pay review body, and twice the rate of inflation. The government says it's because they're a special case, the opposition because it's an election year. And Mrs. Thatcher has confirmed in the Commons that the former head of MI6, Mr. Sir Maurice Oldfield, was a homosexual. But she said there was no evidence security had been compromised.
Finally, the Princess of Wales had to stop for a moment for a rest during her visit with the Prince to the Spanish city of Salamanca, where the Duke of Wellington once defeated the French. She spent 10 minutes sitting quietly in a chapel, but a royal spokesman denied that the Princess was feeling unwell.
The best view of Salamanca for privileged guests is from the balcony of the 17th century town hall, overlooking the great square, the Plaza Mayor. There were enormous crowds, for this was a public holiday, commemorating, oddly enough, the peasants' uprising against the aristocracy. But that was 150 years ago, and feelings change. Because of the crush, the organisation promptly collapsed. The royal party seemed momentarily lost, the detectives were worried, and everyone began to point. It was a very hot day, and the press of people made it seem even hotter. They were on their way to the museum, where it's alleged the princess felt faint. The palace explanation was that the tour was running ahead of time. The princess wanted to go to the loo, so everyone had a short rest. Anyway, the rest was probably necessary, because they were all about to face a 2.5-hour lunch and entertainment. Her reaction was some way from that of an invalid. Back out in the sun again, there was more pleasure to come. The students of Salamanca University had laid down their cloaks for her to walk on and made her godmother of the university. That honour required her to wear a cloak herself, which she did, turning an ancient tradition into instant fashion. Anthony Carthew, News at 10, in Salamanca.
And the British summer will go on for yet another day. It'll be dry and sunny over most of the country, except in the north and the far southwest. That's it. Good night.
Good evening. The warm, dry weather has sparked the region's first serious heathland fire. It happened in West Norfolk this evening when 8 acres of bracken was destroyed at East Winch Common near King's Lynn. The common adjoins the A47, and police were called in to slow traffic down as it passed the blaze. 20 firemen took an hour to bring it under control. Joanne Richardson, the 4-year-old girl abducted in a town centre street at Diss in Norfolk almost 2 weeks ago, has been found safe and well. She was with her father, John Richardson, at his family's home in Washington, Tyne and Wear. He's been taken to Great Yarmouth Police Station and is expected to appear in court tomorrow. Mrs. Richardson, who lives at Dickleborough, travelled tonight to the northeast to collect Joanne. An 8-month-old baby boy has been taken into council care after being abandoned by his mother in a taxi in Basildon. She left the taxi to use a cash machine but failed to return. 2 hours later, she went to the police station and has now been admitted to a psychiatric ward. Production at Vauxhall's in Luton is at a standstill because of a strike by 38 maintenance men who walked out yesterday over a pay dispute. 2,500 workers have been laid off indefinitely in the stoppage, which is costing Vauxhall £4 million a day. Vauxhall's refused to discuss the claim before the annual pay negotiations in September. Another dispute is looming over a new shift system. 130 people are to lose their jobs at Lucas CAV in Sudbury as part of a cost-cutting scheme to make the factory more competitive, and the company hopes most of the redundancies will be voluntary. Essex County Council wants to improve its area's commercial links with the Nordic countries, and today they invited businessmen to a seminar on how to sell goods in Scandinavia. The council say the potential for export there is immense. Surrey Beddoes reports.
Over 140 companies, the majority from Essex and with no experience of trading with Denmark, were invited aboard the Dana Anglia for lunch and to learn more about export opportunities. 6 months ago, an Essex County Council organised trade mission to Denmark produced so many firm orders for the 24 companies involved